first question. Scoot up, buddy, and be real loud. Okay.
Okay, so my first question is, how did the National Farmers Union come to be?
Well, it was chartered in 1902, in September of 1902 in Texas. And it was at first just a Texas organization, but it grew into a national organization within a very short time. It actually was kind of a resurrection of an old organization that was called the National Farmers Alliance and Industrial Union, which faded out of existence in the 1890s, and then a lot of the people that were involved in that organization worked to resurrect the organization, but they gave it a new name.
Yeah. Okay. So my next question is, what was the impact of the National Farmers Union on agriculture in the early 1900s?
Okay, there's several things we can talk about from that perspective. They started in the South, as said, in cotton country, and they worked to form cooperative warehouses to market their cotton cooperatively as a group instead of individually. And they really felt their efforts were successful because the price of cotton went up 2 or 3 cents a pound that year. Now, whether their efforts had that big of an impact is questionable, but people believed it, and they started to join. They understood that together they were more powerful than they were as individuals. And in the early years, it was kind of a southern organization, southern states, but then it migrated and moved to the Midwest, Kansas, Nebraska, and northward, all along the idea of developing and setting up cooperatives, because they felt like that was their only chance to compete with the trust of the day, which were the big conglomerates of corporations.
Okay. Okay, so my next question is, so this year's National History Day theme is taking a stand. In what ways do you think the actions Milo Reno took and the Farmers Holiday Association took to take a stand?
Okay, yeah, Milo Reno was actually a member of the Old Farmers Alliance in the late 1800s. So he had a long history of activism within farmer organizations. And in 1918, I believe, he joined the Iowa Farmers Union. He was an Iowa resident. And within a couple of short years, became an officer on a statewide level. I believe 1921 is when he was elected to office. He was very active in the Farmers Union, but in the late 1920s, well, actually early 1930s, of course, it was hard times on the farm, and they went to Washington, D.C., a lot of the Farmers Union folks for legislative assistance. And the people from Iowa generally in that area were really kind of distraught about not any activity. So he came back and kind of split off from the Farmers Union group, another organization called the Farm Holiday Movement. And it was in a protest. They were going to withhold their products from the market. Because in the early days, the farmers and labor worked hand in hand, and they saw how union labor, how effective that was, and they thought farmers could be union too.
Yeah.
And so he split off, and they organized a withholding action to try to make their point and to raise the market price of their products.
Okay. So my next question is, what role did Milo Reno play in the Farmers Union in Iowa?
In Iowa, he served initially as secretary in 1921, and then in a couple, 3 years, he was the president of the Iowa Farmers Union. And like I say, he went over to started another organization, and there was actually a split in National Farmers Union in the early 1930s about which way to go. There was a faction that wanted to do it. They thought all our problems could be solved with farm cooperatives, buying and selling co-ops. There were those that wanted to do the legislative action. And then, of course, they thought withholding the price or the product from the market would help. Like I say, he moved in that direction. that's where he ended up. But he started out Farmers Union, and then he never did really lead Farmers Union. He just started a purple group.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, what was the perspective of the National Farmers Union when Reno organized these strikes?
Okay, the perspective you say of the Farmers Union, yeah, I think I talked about that a little bit in the previous question, but yeah, farm organizations in general have always struggled to try to remain nonpartisan, not support a party or get too deeply involved in politics. But you just can't do that. You end up doing that. Farmers Union, like I said, there was a split there. The national president was from Oklahoma at the time, and thought he would be. He thought Roosevelt was elected president in '32. Promised him the Secretary of Agriculture's job, and he didn't get it. So he actually kind of fought the Roosevelt and the AAA program, which is an Agriculture Adjustment Act, that was really helping farmers. And farmers were a little confused. They needed the help that they couldn't understand why their leadership was bucking that, but it all had to do with politics in general. And that's always one of the pitfalls and dangers within a farm organization is when they get involved in partisan politics. They also support different legislations. The other thing, the different legislations that legislative activities that would have helped the farmer. And then, like I say, there was another faction within the organization that said, no, we'll do it ourselves. We form these co-ops, and they'll do it that way. So disagreement, you get three farmers in a room, you're going to have four different ideas, and it's true today as it was then.
Yeah. Okay. Was the Farmers Holiday Association considered to be a fringe/radical kind of movement?
It was definitely radical.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't the first time that the strike proposition had been put before people. I mean, they've always thought about doing that, and we saw it as later in the century with the American agriculture movement. So it's always been kind of lurking there in farm country. Yeah, they were radical. That was one of the pitfalls. Sometimes people really get overly zealous in their activities, and as you do some research, you're going to find out that there were people that got shot. I think there was actually a death or two, and there was a lot of bad publicity came at a certain point about withholding commodities from the market. I think it was Sioux City or Sioux Falls that they were withholding milk, and there were people that really needed that milk. It wasn't probably their correct approach, but it did get everybody's attention.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think prompted them to become more violent in their actions?
I just think it's human nature, and that people that are depressed or oppressed, both, they sometimes get really reactionary, and that type of momentum seems to breed upon itself. They also, and I don't know if you may ask me later, but about the penny auctions and the bankers, they felt like the bankers had full control, and the insurance companies and money people. So that was the other issue.
Okay. What was Milo Reno's political impact on the Union when he organized the Farmers Holiday Association? What about the economic impact?
Well, those were some kind of dark days in the Farmers Union organization. As I mentioned a little earlier, they kind of split into three different groups at that point, and you're never stronger by dividing yourself. And people recognize that, but they couldn't put it behind them. And when we started to split into smaller groups, just like a football team that would go out, 11-man football team, and you got 5 people playing on this side and 6 on the other, you're not as good as you have all 11 playing in the center with going with the same goal. I might add that this was also an interesting time in our country as far as sharing information. You know, newspaper was about the only form of communication early. In the late 1920s, radio became an instrument of information and played a role.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's kind of a question that's already been. Okay, one last one. Did the NFU distance themselves from the FHA, since it appears from my reading that it was mainly located in Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and South Dakota?
Yeah, their stretch was a little bit farther than that. I mean, but you're right, that was the main area of concentration. But yeah, it was more or less concentrated there. And repeat that question. I had two different thoughts I wanted to follow up.
Did the National Farmers Union distance themselves from the Farmers Holiday Association, since it appears from my readings that it was mainly located in Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, and South Dakota?
Yeah, and here's what I was trying to remember. I was looking at, I have the copies of the Kansas Farmers Union paper. Every state had their own newspaper. And they had an article when he died in 1936 that he had passed away. Just a quick little bit mention that had passed away. Excuse me, this wasn't the Kansas paper, it was the Farmers Union Herald. Kind of an opposed or a different group that didn't align with Milo Reno. They said we will have further information in a later issue. And I've looked at those papers for 4 or 5 months and he never mentioned it. So all he got was a little mention. So people respected him, but not enough to give him a full write-up paper. And so, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's all the questions I have for you. So thank you for your time.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd be glad to fill you in with more information if I can ever do it. I'm really glad you're doing this project. I think it's really a good choice to pull somebody like this from history and bring it forward. I think you'll find some of the couple of the articles I sent you enlightening about what it's all about. Yeah. And the farmers' plight has stayed the same for many, many years.
Yeah. Okay. Bye.
All right. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, do you know if you got it uploaded? Did you hit stop when you were done? Yeah.